JR, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you,
We
Darren?
we have now made it 4 weeks. 4 before Mark has finally wisened up and gone with somebody better. But hey, I'm still here, Darren Graham, the host, of course, of Big Ten Live, here on the Voice of College Football. Still, honestly, a dream come true to be here. A dream come true to talk to people like JR, our guest for this week. JR, how's it going? Do you want to plug your channel now, of course, I assume, and let people know what you're about, what you do? Something very similar, by the way. I think this is a bit of a crossover thing as your stream also streams on the Big Ten network here. What's up? How you doing tonight? And get people familiar with what you do.
Yeah, man, doing well. My wife is working on some school stuff tonight, so if I wasn't here, I'd just be hanging out all by my lonesome. So I appreciate you having me on. Yep, me and my co-host Zach, we run the Big Ten Huddle over on the Big Ten Huddle podcast YouTube channel. We talk everything Big Ten over there. See, we got Dave in the chat. Dave listens to us from time to time. I think we do have a little bit of crossover between our two shows, and definitely appreciate that from people. So a lot of people know about that. We also do simulcast on the Voice of College Football Big Ten channel when I remember to put in the RSP feed code or whatever it is called. So
whatever. Yeah, so much computer like programming shit that you have to do for all this. I'm just like,
Exactly. But yeah, so my biggest goal with the Big Ten Huddle is just try to get as much Big Ten content out there as possible, because unfortunately the SEC has taken over in a lot of ways, not just with viewership and stuff like that, but with how much people pay attention to their conference. So by no means am I like a fan of the Big Ten. I know it's kind of weird as somebody who runs a Big Ten podcast, but I am somebody that wants to see the Big Ten do well, and I'm pretty sick and tired of the SEC bias that's been out there for a long time. And I'm like, you know what? It's time that we get some Big Ten bias out there. So let's have as many Big Ten podcasts, as many Big Ten writers as we can, and let's just burst this thing open and really give the SEC something to think about.
hell yeah, man. I'm all about it. And speaking of, don't forget to like this stream itself, get it up into that almighty algorithm, get subscribed to the Big Ten channel at the Voice of College Football so you see JR's streams and this weekly live show. And speaking of the SEC, I'm glad JR brought it up because that's who we're directly competing with here. I want to have more subscribers. I want to have 3 times the subscribers, 4, 5, however infinitely many more subscribers than the SEC channel of the Voice of College Football. All respect to them. They're great guys. I'm sure. Haven't checked them out yet. Honestly, haven't had the time. If I was a good student, I'd be doing schoolwork tonight instead of doing this. But instead, I'm here with you guys. And honestly, I'm pretty happy to be here still. But we got to talk getting into our coverage tonight. We really need to talk, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because the elephant in the room, I'm just going to address it now, as JR, you are an Ohio State fan. Bless your heart. I am a Michigan fan. We got to get to what is probably, well, this would have been big news if maybe they hadn't already lost 2 games this season. And this was the only, I think it was the only at the time top 25 matchup in the Big Ten from this past week. But Michigan falls on the road to Illinois 21-7. Honestly, it wasn't that entirely close of a game. I'm just going to run through some stats and some analysis here. Michigan actually lost this game despite winning the yardage battle. Michigan had 322 yards of offense. Illinois only 267 yards of offense in this game. They won the 3rd down and 4th down efficiency battle, more efficient on 3rd and 4th down than Illinois, and they had more first downs. They also had 33 minutes of time of possession, which if you know math, that's more than Illinois. The story in this game for me was the turnovers. Illinois got 17 of their 21 points, and of course they had a 2-point conversion to make it seem like they scored 3 touchdowns. But they got 17 of their 21 points on drives that started all off of turnovers on the Michigan 38-yard line, their own 49, and their own 45. They had short fields all day. Luke Altmaier only had to go 9 of 19 for 80 yards and a touchdown to win this one. And Michigan's offense is on the side of a milk carton right now. I don't know what else to say. It's just Jack Tuttle, it turns out. Not the guy. What say you about this game, JR? Just kind of like broadly.
Yeah, this game did not play out the way I thought it would for an Illinois win. So I come away more impressed with Illinois than I do discouraged about Michigan in this one. I realize there's an Ohio State fan saying discouraged about Michigan. Obviously, as an Ohio State fan, I'm totally fine with it. But I'm just saying, like, for the team overall, because you look at the box score, Michigan threw for over 200 yards and they rushed for over 100 yards. Illinois threw for 80 yards and they rushed for nearly 200 yards. If you would ask me, those two would have been flipped in this game. You would have thought Michigan would have thrown for 80 yards and rushed for 200, and it would have been Illinois that was throwing for 200 yards. But I guess Illinois was really channeling their 1924 and going for this one with the, really rushing the ball. They did throw it 18 times. I had a hard time when I put out my weekly grades for the quarterbacks. I had a hard time evaluating Luke Altmaier here because he did only throw for 80 yards, but he did have a touchdown. He did only complete 50% of his passes, but it seemed like whenever they needed him to get yards for the team, he did it with his legs. And I think that's something that was pretty impressive for Luke Altmaier to do. Jack Tuttle, I don't know where you go from here. I feel like if I'm Michigan, you just need to pick a quarterback and go with it. This whole going back and forth, and we'll talk about Michigan State later, I'm sure. But this whole thing that, Sherrone Moore is doing where he doesn't know which quarterback. And I don't know how much of that is he's just trying to hold back from Michigan State or if he actually doesn't know. I have no idea. Leads me to believe he doesn't actually know because he announced Orji as the starter on a Monday earlier in the season. So I feel like he wouldn't have a problem with doing it now. But this is one of those situations where I feel like if I'm Michigan, all three quarterbacks have strengths and weaknesses. I wouldn't say any of them have, impressed me to the level where any of them should be starting. So I feel like at this point, this week, Sherrone Moore just needs to figure out who his quarterback is. And honestly, I know that we're talking about three quarterbacks. It needs to be Jaden Davis. You need to put Jaden Davis on the field this week. Yeah, I think he's the future of this team, right? Even if you get Bryce Underwood, which I know that's the rumor out there, even if you get him for next year, you're going to need to see what you have in Jaden Davis right now. You can see what you have in practice, but let's look at, what their evaluations were of these three quarterbacks in practice before. You obviously didn't get a great evaluation. So I know the whole thing about Jaden Davis's parents and stuff like that. I get that. But if I'm Sherrone Moore, I'm going to those parents and being like, look, guys, this is best for us. This is best for your son to get out there and play. Say he only plays 4 games this season. He still has a red shirt. He can still redshirt. And so for me, I feel like that's the best option for Michigan. Obviously, if the parents don't want him to play, there's not really much you can do there. But at the end of the day, they just need to pick a quarterback and go with him.
Well, that's interesting that you bring that up because I strongly agree with you on some points. I really disagree with you actually on the Jaden Davis thing, which we can kind of circle back to in a minute if you want. But I have been saying since the beginning, even in the preseason, I did a big video on Darren Talks Ball, of course, my other channel, about evaluating all the Michigan quarterbacks they had on roster and kind of going over the pros and cons of each one. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember right, my memory isn't as great as it used to be, being the age I am now, but I'm pretty sure I ended that off. And I've been saying ever since that you settle on a guy and you ride him out and you let him make some mistakes, learn from those mistakes, develop on the fly, and kind of do a lot of things teams typically do when they enter a kind of a new phase or a new era, especially, new coach, new offensive coordinator, whole new setup. And now I think that they're paying the price for not having done that earlier in the season. Because you go back, and especially as a Michigan fan, I'm always in a season like this, you're always going back and thinking about the what if this or what if that? How much different would it be now? And you have to think, especially with how, like you said, Jack Tuttle threw for over 208 yards in this. He threw for 208 yards in this game, 20 of 32. It was a good performance for a Michigan quarterback, but what is the bar? That's the lowest of low bars I can think of right now. But then you have to go back and think about what if this team had just stuck it out with Davis Warren a little bit longer, or just stuck it out with him long term? Because the thing with Davis Warren was the turnovers. Outside of that, he was on film, at least from my review, and I'd be interested to see your opinion on this. He was more accurate than Tuttle. He wasn't missing guys on crossing routes 5 yards behind them. And then on the first play of the game, they have that fade route they call for Amarian Walker down the sideline, which I like seeing Amarian Walker out there. I think he's played decent enough, especially with the state of this wide receiver room, to be out there. He's 6'3". He can run. He's the only true X wide receiver you have on this roster. But then he throws it up to him and it's 5 yards short and 3 yards too far. It's just nowhere near him. Davis Warren was a more accurate passer, and it was just the interception problem. So then you move on from him because you're I don't know, feeling the pressure or whatever of having to have the guy then in the moment. Maybe the Texas game got in their heads or whatever. Move on to Alex Orji, doesn't turn the ball over, but the offense isn't set up for a quarterback like him. And then you move on to Jack Tuttle now, who now apparently we're hearing was going to be the guy, but was injured and this or that, and just flat performance. I mean, it got some yards, but if you can't get any more than 7 points at the end of the day, what can you do with that? Turned it over a couple of times, a bad interception, another bad interception that got called back because of a weird penalty on the other side of the field, nowhere near the ball. And then, of course, a fumble, and a pretty bad one at that. It just feels like there was a point at which Michigan could have stuck it out with whoever they had picked at the beginning of the season, and they didn't. And now we've gone through this like quarterback musical chairs where none of these guys have the experience. None of these guys have gotten settled in. And just no matter who you get at this point, you're basically playing a first-year starter who is playing in their first few games.
Which is insane, right? Because this is what, Tuttle's 7th year? Like, the dude's 25 years old. I mean, he's darn near almost as old as me, which I know I'm not old, but still, like, I've been out of college for a while, so it's kind of wild to think he's still there. I do agree with your point on Davis Warren. If you look at some of like the more in-depth stats with Davis Warren, he did throw 6 interceptions, but he only had 3 turnover-worthy throws, which means that they only put 3 of those interceptions, PFF that is, on Davis Warren. Now, I can't remember every single interception he threw, but I would like to go back and see those, because if I'm not mistaken, there were times when he threw interceptions that I said, I don't think that was Davis Warren's fault. Like, I think that was a receiver ran the wrong route or whatever. Like, and unfortunately, I think the Michigan quarterbacks are getting a lot of the blame for Ron Bellamy just being a terrible wide receiver coach.
Yeah.
He needs to go after this year. The wide receivers have never been fantastic under him. I mean, Michigan has a history of good wide receivers. Heck, they have a history of guys like Travis Hunter playing both ways and Charles Woods. I mean, like they have guys like that have done amazing things, but you have Ron Bellamy in there, and unfortunately for them, this is what happens when you don't have JJ McCarthy, top 10 NFL draft pick, playing quarterback for you. And I do think Roman Wilson and Cornelius, what was his last name?
Cornelius Johnson. Yeah.
I do think those guys were much talented than what you have now. And I do think Samaj Morgan is a talented athletic player, but I mean, when I watch Samaj Morgan, he looks as frustrated as can be, because I'm sure he's getting downfield at times and he's probably open. Obviously, we can't see it on the TV copy, but he's probably getting downfield a few times and he's probably open and he's just not getting the ball. So I'd be upset with him as well. But I agree with you on Davis Warren. I can definitely see why somebody would go back to Davis Warren. And honestly, it's been kind of weird that they haven't gone back to him at some point. And the other thing I'll bring up is that a lot of people talk about how Alex Orji didn't turn the ball over, which, yes, he has 1 interception to Davis Warren's 3, or to Davis Warren's 6. His turnover-worthy throw percentage, Alex Orji's, is 3.5. Davis Warren's is 3.6. So
that's
it's honestly not that far. Wow. Yeah, it's honestly not that far off with each other. So I don't know. This is a weird one. I would probably go back to Davis Warren if Jaden Davis is an option. If not, I'd probably go to Alex Orji. We'll see what happens, but I feel like they're probably going to go with Jack Tuttle. I don't know what that prediction is. But at the same time, we also have to give credit to this Illinois defense as well, because this Illinois defense, they've had a problem stopping the run almost all year, and they've done a good job of playing pass defense and getting interceptions and stuff like that. And yeah, they had 1 in this game, but it was the forced fumbles and stuff like that they were able to cause. And I think Illinois, like I said, this is more about Illinois being a good team in my mind than Michigan not playing well. Not saying Michigan did play well, but I'm looking at this and saying Illinois, good team, did what they had to do to win the game.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, really. I do think that it was, like you, it was a bit of a surprise how well Illinois did against the run game in this one. I think the thing we also need to bring up is, especially, when I was doing kind of I didn't end up doing a full prediction for this game, but when I previewed this game, I looked back on the Penn State game and thought, Illinois is going to get run on by Michigan. And then I forgot, I kind of overlooked the fact that Penn State's run game, the way that they scheme it up, is actually much different from Michigan's. It actually frustrates the hell out of me as a Michigan fan, because like I see what Andy Kotelnicki is doing with like some Wildcat stuff. And like, if you gave Alex Orji to Andy Kotelnicki, like he'd know what to actually do with him. Like he would have that guy running read option stuff and running it well. But they gave up a ton of rushing yards to Penn State a few weeks ago, but now they're faced against a Michigan team that runs between the tackles a lot more frequently, does a lot more like base stuff, but what they've always kind of hung their hat on is like doing it well, like running duo really effectively. And in this one, Illinois holds Michigan to 114 yards, like you said, but on 38 attempts, that's only 3 yards a rush. 3 yards a rush with and also, again, all respect to
Sacks
Illinois.
were in there as
Michigan
well.
didn't play Khalil Mullins until like their third drive of the game. He didn't see like a single snap until the second or third drive of the game. That is just egregious to me from a coaching standpoint. He is your best offensive player so far this season.
Yeah, I think Donovan Edwards finishes with only 7 carries. I mean, you look at the box score and you say Khalil Mullins got almost 3 times the carries that Donovan Edwards got, but you still had Donovan Edwards carrying the rock there more than he should have been until he fumbled there. So, I mean, I think at that point in time, if I'm remembering correctly, he didn't really see the ball after that, but it's just too late. Khalil Mullins needs to be the one toting the rock 20, 25 times a game, and you put Donovan Edwards in there every now and then to give Khalil Mullins a break. It's not the other way around. And honestly, I think Donovan Edwards is a really athletic player and has areas that he can contribute to the team in other ways as well. I think you can put him out, in the slot or something like that. They keep putting Colston Loveland out there wide, so why not throw Donovan Edwards in the slot? You can't tell me that this offense wouldn't be better if you had Colston Loveland outside, Samaj Morgan and Donovan Edwards both out there at wide receiver, and Khalil Mullins in running back. You can't tell me that's not the best option for this team right now.
It's been the consistent issue all season with this team is they're not you as an Ohio State fan will probably appreciate this, but I reference what Urban Meyer always used to say on like his podcast appearances and stuff that I've listened to. You base your offense around who your best 11 offensive players are, and you run with that. And like Michigan's best 11 offensive players right now are like a 22 personnel, 2 tight ends, 2 running backs, and like Samaj Morgan occasionally out there, stuff like that. Yeah, it's frustrating. It's extremely frustrating. I'm sure not as frustrating for you as an Ohio State fan, but we'll move on. Of course.
Let me ask one more thing. Is Klein okay? I know he got hurt in this game. Have we heard any more about him? I haven't heard anything.
I didn't actually get to see that. I didn't get to check in on it yet. I know Michigan as a whole is pretty banged up, actually. And it's something that's gotten like there were guys in that defensive line that are like redshirt freshmen and stuff in this game, too, that were filling in for guys who were pretty banged up. But speaking of feeling banged up, to try to transition as much as possible, I felt pretty banged up after this one because I was completely wrong on my prediction for this game. And speaking of kind of flipping stats, like if you would have told me that Iowa did what MSU did in this game, I'd be like, maybe not the 250 some yards of passing, but like definitely the rushing battle and time of possession battle and stuff. I'd be like, oh yeah, Iowa did Iowa things in this one. But MSU beats Iowa 32-20. Aiden Childs really looks like he's starting to come along. What were your overarching thoughts on this one? An upset, and against a team that I said literally last week on this show that I thought Iowa had a chance at the college football playoff still, and boy, was I wrong.
Well, I mean, this is what you get when you have Cade McNamara struggling. I think at one point he had less completions than Michigan State had field goals made in the game, which is just absolutely baffling. But, when Cade McNamara is good, Cade McNamara is good. I'm not going to say he's one of the best in the league or something like that, but when he's good, he does a good job and he can be a good quarterback for you. But when he really struggles, you see it, and it's really hard for this offense to move. And in this game, Michigan State, they were not afraid of Cade McNamara at all. They said Cade McNamara is going to be the one who beats us, and the wide receivers are going to be the ones who beat us because our linebackers are going to play right up to the line of scrimmage, and we're not going to let you get anywhere. Now, Caleb Johnson did break off that 175-yard run, which accounts for over 50% of the rushing yards for Iowa.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. But I mean, at the end of the day, like they did a really good job of stopping Caleb Johnson. Right now, the only 2 teams in the nation that have been able to stop Caleb Johnson are Michigan State and Ohio State. And, you have to give a lot of credit there. So I think everybody kind of knew that was the formula. And that's what Michigan State was able to do in this one. They gave it the one big run. But at the end of the day, I think the bigger storyline in this one is the tackling by Iowa. Just how terrible they were at tackling, which I do think you need to give Michigan State's receivers some credit with what they were able to do, yards after the catch and stuff like that. But my word, I can't remember the last time I saw this poor of a tackling effort by Iowa in a game. It was
from
horrendous.
A Phil Parker defense. I think they averaged like 3 or 4 missed tackles a game, and in this one they had 9 or 10, something even maybe
like that. I'll have to look it up.
It was like 3 times the amount of normal missed tackles. You bring up Caleb Johnson outside of that 75-yard touchdown. he had 13 carries, averaging just 1.77 yards per carry in this game. Just completely shut down. And I didn't see it coming. Heading into the season, the defensive line, especially for Michigan State, was one of the biggest question marks after losing Derek Harmon in the transfer portal, having to bring in some guys kind of last minute in the transfer portal too, kind of really try to rework that defensive line in the offseason and rebuild it. And it looks like they did a good job. Jonathan Smith is doing a good job over there in his first season. I think a lot of Michigan State fans, I have one of my best buddies is a Michigan State grad, and he was just hoping for anything this season. And to be 4-3 at this point and have this big win, 3 losses against a Boston College team who's decent, and then obviously Ohio State and Oregon, I think is kind of the ideal situation for Michigan State right now, in all honesty, compared to what they expected in year 1 of Jonathan Smith. And it's just crazy to go through the stats again, because 468 yards, by the way, on a Phil Parker defense is a lot of offensive movement. And again, Aiden Childs against the defense filled with, Quinn Schultes and Sebastian Castro's and a defense that plays a lot of zone and will get a lot of tips and overthrow interceptions and things against a interception prone quarterback. I thought they'd get some more turnovers in this game, and they didn't. The turnover battle is even 1-1. And then the time of possession battle was absolutely lopsided. Michigan State had the ball for damn near, I think it was like 39 minutes and 40 seconds. And Iowa just didn't, without being able to run the ball and play that kind of efficiency monster style of ball that they usually play, they just couldn't do anything. They couldn't get out of their own way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I mean, there was really nothing we saw from the Iowa offense in this one that gave you any hope. And I said on our show earlier, like, this is where you get in trouble with Kirk Ferentz as your head coach. Kirk Ferentz has, him sticking with the game plan and stuff like that has worked at times, but then other times it just looks terrible. And this is what you have, because you have a team that kept trying to pound the rock, and it never worked. And then you had them try to get to Cade McNamara to throw the ball, and that still never worked. At some point, you had to go to Brendan Sullivan in this game if you wanted a chance to win the game. With the way your defense was playing, the way things were working, you needed a playmaker back there at quarterback, and you needed somebody that was able to hold on to the ball longer than 3 plays in one drive. And he wasn't, Cade McNamara wasn't able to do that. I get that Brendan Sullivan takes more sacks. I think that's the biggest thing, because when he was at Northwestern, he took a lot of sacks. I mean, I think he had a game where he had like 7 sacks on him. So, I mean, he does take a lot of sacks, and that's frustrating. But you do make up for that by being a playmaker, being able to get out of the pocket, move around, have a threat to be able to run. So that way it's not just Caleb Johnson the entire time. And unfortunately for them, they never went to him. And this is a situation where Kirk Ferentz's stubbornness, it really bit him in the butt, and it stinks for them. Darren, I did look up the missed tackles for Iowa, 19.
Oh my
PFF
God.
has 19 missed tackles. Jay Higgins with 3, Quinn Schulte with 3.
Higgins with 3.
Yeah.
He's been a great linebacker so far this season.
Yeah, he's not been tackling as well this season. Nwankpa with 3, the 5-star on their defense. John Nestor, he missed almost 50% of his attempted tackles. He had 3. Yeah, it was.
And I mean, when you assume any missed tackle means what? Anywhere between an extra 5 or 10 yards.
Typically. Yeah,
that could really do you in at the end of the day. Yeah, that's Iowa. I like the fact that you bring up like kind of the limitations that Iowa has, because I think it's a lot of the same for Michigan and any team that kind of has that basic philosophy and approach to the game. The problem with it is the path to victory in any given game is just so narrow. You have to do so many things right. When it's all clicking, it looks like what you did to Washington. But when Caleb Johnson struggles a little bit, if the offensive line isn't getting all their blocks lined up quite right, if the defense, isn't doing their typical thing, if you're not playing the field position battle as well, which I don't think they did very well in this game at all, you're just not going to come out on top, and you need all those ducks lined up in a row to come out with victories consistently. But I know you're a little short on time tonight. You got to go over and do the Ohio State call-in show. So we're going to get to the story of college football so far this season, and I'm already doing it. I'm doing it. You guys can tell me I'm crazy. I'm putting Ohio State on upset alert when they play this team. Indiana, my God, nearly 500 yards of offense on who was leading into this one, and it really makes me start to question this man's rankings and everything about him. For the 500 yards of offense on what was the SP plus #1 defense headed into this past week, 56-7, an absolute beatdown. JR, what are your main takeaways from this game?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the scariest thing that happened with Indiana in this game is that Curtis Rourke went down and they never missed a beat with Taven Jackson in
Yeah.
there. Now,
Yeah.
you could argue that Nebraska wasn't, playing as hard when Taven Jackson was in there, and I get that. They definitely weren't flying around like you normally see them flying around, so I can definitely get that. But Taven Jackson did not look like the Taven Jackson that we saw last year. Last year, he had what, 2 touchdown passes, 5 interceptions, something like that.
Yep.
Just turns out when your head coach is Tom Allen and when your head coach is Kirk Cignetti, your quarterback's going to play a whole lot better. And I think that Taven Jackson really proved himself to be one of the best backup quarterbacks in all of college football this game by being able to come in here against a really good defense in Nebraska and be able to throw and get 7 for 8, 91 yards, 2 touchdown passes. He had more touchdown passes than Curtis Rourke had. So
it was crazy. I'm glad you brought that up first, because I did a video on this game on my channel, and Darren talks about it earlier today, and I brought that up where like Curtis Rourke goes down and this team doesn't miss a single beat. They are just annihilating everybody offensively. And the scary thing right now, I think, really with Indiana is we saw them in a lot of games where the final score wasn't really indicative of how the game had actually gone. I think it was their game against Maryland and their game against some other opponents, even against Biff Poggi's team, Charlotte. It was like a 3-point game or a 7-point game in a lot of those games, like midway through the third quarter or even entering the fourth quarter in some of those, and they pull away late. And I was feeling a little like this team could be really great. They've got a lot of potential. It's not just a team that's being carried by like a generational quarterback kind of thing, like we see sometimes of these kind of like Cinderella stories. It's not like a, Ashton Jeanty kind of carrying Boise State thing right now. Like they have great players across the board, offensively and defensively. But to see them like come right out, jump the gun on Nebraska, a team that I thought would be a good, decent Big Ten team coming into the season, and just throttle them and really outplay them at all 3 phases of the game was eye-opening to me, to say the least. By the way, if you want to get into it, Dylan Raiola, just oof.
Yeah, this is what you get when you rely on a freshman quarterback to win you games, which I'm not saying you shouldn't do at times. Obviously, you're going to have to rely on your quarterback to do that. But in this game, Nebraska did not run the ball well enough. They were 2.4 yards per carry, which I get. There were some sacks in there and stuff like that. And I think Nayor had a backward, screen pass or jet sweep or something like that, where that did take away some yards. And so, like at the end of the day, you have to run the ball better if you're going to beat a team like Indiana. And I think that's what Indiana did in this game. Is they said, look, we know Dylan Raiola is going to need help. We know he's going to have to be able to have a running game. And I think one of the biggest things was, I think it was the second drive for Nebraska when was it Dowdell that fumbled that ball on 4th and 1, which it really isn't that big of a deal. You fumble on 4th and 1, but I think you would have got it if you didn't fumble. So at the end of the day, like that felt like a big turning point there, where it felt like if Nebraska was going to win this game, it was going to be Dylan Raiola doing it, which I thought Nebraska's wide receivers would give Indiana's cornerbacks a little bit of a harder time because of how big they are. And I thought Nebraska would have capitalized on that. But I think if you're Nebraska, you are having serious second thoughts about Scott Satterfield as your offensive coordinator right now. Now they are 5-2. This has not been a bad offense. This hasn't been an Iowa offense and stuff like that where they're one-dimensional all year. So I'm not saying that, he needs to be fired or anything like that. But I do think in this one, there was a very obvious way that you were going to be able to capitalize on Indiana, and I just didn't see him go to it very often. Now, credit Indiana. They were doing a lot of, double coverage on the outside the numbers and stuff like that, where you would normally throw the ball up. So I do give Indiana credit there, but with how big some of these wide receivers were, you had to at least give it a shot a few times, and it felt like they never really did. And so, for me, if I'm a Nebraska fan, I'm having some serious second thoughts about Scott Satterfield right now after last year with all the turnovers, and this year in this game against Indiana. I mean, I'm looking at it and I'm like, what are we doing here? We really need to evaluate this as the rest of the year goes on.
Yeah, I'm glad. I really like your analysis there. And I in a way, see Dylan Raiola coming in as a freshman quarterback and everything that they've kind of put on his plate. And in an interesting way, kind of liken it to what's been done with Aiden Childs at MSU. It's almost like go out there, sling it. We're going to run our offense full bore, everything we like to do right off the bat. Make your mistakes, learn from them, and let's come back next year or what have you. No, like you said, they're still 5-2, but you also look at like their only 2 losses are an Indiana team that may be a really great team. We'll know more about them, especially when they play Ohio State in a few weeks, and Illinois, who is I'd say a fairly good Big Ten team. It's also really hard to sort out this Big Ten with everything going on outside of like what I would argue are the obvious top 4 teams. But it's just wild to me too when you look at the like structure of Nebraska's offense from a personnel standpoint. They've got a very experienced offensive line outside of, I think they're playing 1 sophomore at guard. They have 2 really good wide receivers who are, like you said, bigger body guys, experienced guys, 2 experienced running backs that I think are pretty good running backs in Dowdell and Johnson, a decent tight end. Like you've got the support cast for Raiola. If you had just really focused on running the ball better, especially in fall camp, and made that kind of the emphasis of your team and your approach, running the football better, utilizing your tight end more, doing all the kind of things you typically do to kind of get a freshman quarterback, worked into your system. And it just seems like right from the get-go this season, they didn't really do that with him. They were like, we're going to lean on Raiola and go as far as he can take us. And where he takes you is in this game, especially 5.3 yards per attempt and 3 interceptions, 28 of 44 for 234 yards. And at times, honestly, he kind of looked, anytime there's pressure, he seems to be holding on the ball for too long. He steps up in the pocket and instantly his footwork isn't right, which makes him miss passes. It's just typical freshman quarterback stuff. But to your point, the offensive coordinator over there should know what he was getting into when they started a freshman quarterback.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, Nebraska, they've gotten too complacent with running between the tackles, especially in this game. Like I said, when you have the receivers with the size advantage that they have, these receivers should be able to be on the outside and block these tiny cornerbacks like 5, 6, 7 yards down the field. And they weren't really doing that. Like they weren't getting to the outside and allowing for their wide receivers to have the size advantage. So, I mean, I look at it and I'm like, what in the world is Scott Satterfield thinking? Like, I get you want to run, an offense that, features your 5-star quarterback who has played well this season. I mean, he's definitely had his stinkers, but I mean, I think overall, like Dylan Raiola has been a good quarterback so far this season, especially considering his age. I mean, he's going up against, Cade McNamara is 24 years old. Will Howard's 23, 24 years old. Will Rogers.
What recruiting class was Cade in? Was it like the same as like,
I think he was.
It's a dude from Utah, like all those dudes.
Yeah, I don't think he's as old as Jack Tuttle. I think he's 1 year less than Tuttle. I think he's in his 6th year. But yeah, I mean, the Big Ten has a ton of guys who are over 22 years old playing quarterback right now, and then it's like Dylan Raiola and Aiden Childs that are just trying to survive for their lives at 19.
Who aren't even close to being old enough to drink. Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah,
so I do think that you have to give some credit there with the age and stuff, but for the most part, I don't see Scott Satterfield capitalizing on areas that would help Dylan Raiola and this young quarterback do what he needs to do to win games. I see him relying too much on an 18-year-old when he has other avenues that he should be trying to go for. And I think it's concerning for Nebraska fans. Obviously, Tony White is the real deal, but as a Nebraska Rascal put in there, Ed Foley, special teams, Scott Satterfield, OC. I'm not quite there with Satterfield yet. I think you need to see more this season. Ed Foley definitely should go. But Satterfield, he's definitely on that cusp right now where if things don't get better for the offense, Matt Rule's going to have to move on from his buddy. And I know that's hard because Matt Rule's been with him for a long time, but it's not going to cut it at Nebraska. They want to win.
It's just a lot of square peg, round hole in the approach like we've been talking about. By the way, the special teams, a couple points on that. I think Nebraska's down there in like the triple digits in SP plus special teams still. And how wild is it? Maybe we can kind of talk about this for a second before we get into our previews, but how wild is it that there are so many Big Ten teams uncharacteristically struggling with special teams this season in general? I feel like every week there's missed field goals, bad punts, even Michigan, Tommy Doman, who was a pretty good punter last year, shanking one in this game. It's been wild. It's been a very outside of who I think are the solid 4 best teams in this conference. It's been a lot of tumultuous play across the board for a lot of these teams, and even in special teams, which is usually, we talk about Big Ten football, you talk about running the ball, playing defense, and playing great special teams.
Yeah, I mean Doman, he struggled this season. He had that I think it was a good snap in the game against Illinois,
Mhm.
but he fumbled the snap and made it hard. I mean, that definitely wasn't on Zavada. Zavada's a fantastic kicker. In my
Yeah.
eyes, he can't do
Yeah.
anything wrong. Like, if he misses the field goal, it's the wind's fault or something because
Right. Right.
he's an ace. But yeah, Doman, I don't think he has a single punt that's been inside the 20-yard line this season, which that's very uncharacteristic for a
Mhm.
Michigan punter. And you're right, all over the Big Ten, we're seeing special teams issues and stuff like that we're not really used to seeing. Iowa has struggled with their special
Yeah.
teams this season as well, and that's something that's been uncharacteristic of an Iowa team under Kirk Ferentz. So at the end of the day, like
Rutgers has struggled at times to make field goals and things, which is they have a coach who was a special
right,
teams guy. Like, yeah,
exactly, and
Washington.
he was
Yeah.
under Urban, where Urban preached that kind of stuff, that like special
Mhm.
teams, special teams, special teams, and Greg Schiano, it's not going for him this year. So
Yeah.
a lot of uncharacteristic stuff like that, like you said.
Yeah. Leading to a lot of on brand Big Ten games that are ending like 19-17, by the way. Like there's a lot of Big Ten football going on out here still. Well, getting into our preview section, we're going to skip over Michigan State for now, I think, if that's okay with you, because
Let's
what
do
else?
it.
What else do I have to say about football in my state right now? Unless you want to talk Lions.
No, I don't
No?
watch the
No.
NFL very much, so
Yeah,
I
me
wouldn't be
neither.
very good there.
Me neither. That's all good. I barely watch any, and that's only the Lions. Let's get to what could be kind of an interesting matchup. Illinois obviously coming over a big win, though. Can you really say that these days when you beat Michigan? I still don't understand why Washington stormed the field, but hey, do what you want to do. Illinois traveling to Oregon. This is going to be the 3:30 p.m. CBS game. No, it's not going to be. I see I made an error in the thing now. It's not going to be at whatever that is that I typed in the thing earlier today, military time or whatever. Mute the TV for this one because it's got the two guys calling it that I personally think are kind of checked out at this point. They did the Illinois Michigan game last week, and it wasn't necessarily great. JR, what are your thoughts? Can Illinois keep this game any kind of close, or is Oregon the new number one team in the country in the AP pool, if I'm remembering right, by the way? Are they just going to do to Illinois what they did to another Midwestern team in Purdue last week?
Yeah, first off on the commentators, CBS did do a good job with the production of that Illinois game, but you're exactly right. Gary Danielson, he misses the SEC so much. He's like getting ready to quit right now if the Big Ten is back next year, which they are. So sure, Gary Danielson, move on. Let's get Jake Butt or somebody who's actually
Right.
a good color analyst in there. So or a play-by-play analyst in there. So yeah, so this game's really interesting to me, this Illinois Oregon game. I kind of wish it was at Illinois. I think that there would be a little bit of a more interesting game. If I'm not mistaken, Oregon has started like 20-point favorites. That seems a little high to me. I guess I could see the game getting out of hand and Oregon getting up by more, but at the end of the day,
Oregon
like
is, sorry to interrupt you, Oregon is a 21.5 according to ESPN right now.
21 and a half. Yeah.
Yep.
So I figured they were up there somewhere by 20. But yeah, for me, like a lot of this comes down to Illinois' offensive line, because we saw what Oregon's defensive line and Derek Harmon was able to do to Ohio State's offensive line, which has been a pretty good offensive line this year. I know that they didn't really face too many great defenses, but Iowa was a good defensive line that definitely did well against Michigan State in that game. So, they're a better defensive line than I think some people give them credit for. So Ohio State did have a track record of doing pretty well, but it's really going to be a big test for them in this one. If they're going to want to be able to run the ball with Josh McCray and some of those other guys, they're going to have to be able to get some push up front. You don't really have with Caden Fagan out. I think he's out for the season. If not, he's been out for a while.
I knew he was out, but yeah.
I don't remember if it's out for the season or just for a good amount of time. But yeah, without him, you really don't have too many running backs that are playmakers to be able to, get over a bad blocking offensive line. And if Oregon's able to get through the middle of that offensive line, it's going to be a long day for Illinois trying to run the ball. I do think Luke Altmaier has some more mobility than people give him credit for. He was, like I said, he was able to run the ball pretty well against Michigan and pick up yards when they needed to. And so he does get out of the pocket pretty well. So I do think they have that going for him. But at the end of the day, it's going to have to come down to Illinois' wide receivers. Are they really as good as some of us think they are? I think they're very good. I think Zachary Franklin, Pat Bryant are two of the best duos, not only in the Big Ten, but I think you could argue they're top 10 in the country, even possibly. So for me, that's a very good duo, and they're going to have to show it against this Oregon secondary, because this Oregon secondary, even though I do think they're really good, they're also kind of smaller, like Indiana's is. So if you're going to be able to capitalize on that, you're going to have to run to the outside, let these guys block those quarterbacks, and then you're also going to have to throw the ball outside the numbers and hope those guys can come up with it.
They are smaller, but I will say Jabbar Muhammad is a very physical corner, so that'll be an
Yeah.
interesting matchup. I would think that he'll get put on Pat Bryant more often. The other interesting thing I find in this game is Illinois is still running a lot of the same uh, defensive scheme stuff that I'm blanking on his name. Ryan Walters ran
Ryan
over at
Walters.
Purdue, who Oregon just played last week and absolutely boat raced. If Illinois comes out in a lot of like man coverages and not really disguising anything, they disguise a lot more now, a hell of a lot more now than they did when they had Ryan Walters' defense in there. But I feel like, especially if they try to man up specifically on those wide receivers, it could be a bad night for them or a bad day for them or whatever time it is. I'm completely still thrown off by that error I made typing that thing in the thing down there. But yeah, does Oregon get Birch back for this game? Have you heard anything on that? Because if they get Birch back, especially talking about Illinois' offensive line, that could be really not great for them in this game. Oregon already has, like you said, Derek Harmon. Uiagalelei is a good defensive end. I don't think he's like an eye-popping like first-round talent or anything like that, but can be a really great defensive end in this game, especially if they get Jordan Birch back. That would be huge.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to listen to Dan Lanning's comments today to the press, and he normally doesn't give a whole lot of comments and doesn't give a whole lot of injury updates. Sounds like he really hates his press, but which not every head coach does, so I get it. But yeah, I haven't heard anything, and I haven't heard anybody really mention it. Most of the stuff coming out of Oregon has still been the the talk about the last game and stuff that went well there and stuff like that. So I'm sure there'll be mentioned later on in the week, but yeah, I haven't heard if Jordan Birch is back yet.
Yeah, we'll probably hear about it, especially considering today is only Monday. We'll probably hear about it
Yeah.
more going on. But yeah, I honestly, the way I lean in this one, I would honestly not be surprised if Oregon covers in this one. I know it's a huge point spread, but Illinois, weird thing going on in the Big Ten so far this season outside of USCing, if we can use that as a verb, against Penn State. Not many teams making the cross-country trek and winning games, and I don't see Illinois even having much luck in this one. I think Oregon's defense is still somehow pretty underrated. They just have athletes and great players at all levels. They got Jeffrey Bassa back. Bryce Betcher is a really great like throwback off-ball linebacker that can also like cover a little bit. He reminds me a little bit of Jack Campbell from Iowa a few years ago. Just like a great defense at all three levels. And I don't, like you said, Luke Altmaier's got some running ability. They've got Pat Bryant, but it seems like you need a lot more than just a couple of great players on your offense. And speaking of, we saw what Oregon was able to do, slowing down Ohio State a few weeks ago with the just litany of offensive weapons they have. So yeah, it'll be interesting in that one. Do you have any final thoughts on that one before we get to our next preview here?
Yeah, final thought is just I think you're right. I think Oregon, if they don't cover, they're close to covering in this one. Just I mean, it's at Oregon. This is going to be a long trek for Illinois. It's unfortunate, but it's unfortunate for Illinois. But at the end of the day, this is the number one team in the country in Oregon, and there's a reason why. I think that their defense is also underrated. I really agree with that. And I think one of the secrets to it is they're a really good tackling team. Tackling is something that we're seeing become kind of a lost art in college football right now because you have so many teams worried about injuries and stuff in practice, so you don't see them tackling as much. But Oregon, between Bassa, Bocher, and even their defensive line, they tackle very well also, and their safeties are doing a good job tackling. So, I mean, when you look at college football, tackling is down overall, so they're not the perfect tackling team by any means, but when you look at the rest of college football, they actually do a pretty good job of it. So It's definitely something they have in their favor, and I don't think Illinois has the make you miss kind of guys to really battle with that. And
like you said, Caden Fagan might be the most make you miss guy on that offense, and he's not going to play. So, yeah, people forget too. I think it's a bit of a brand bias thing. We always think Oregon, we think high flying offense, and what do you call it? Finesse play. But this is a Dan Lanning defensive minded team. It is. Yeah. Good points as always. Let's go to. Let's do Penn State. I want to get your thoughts on this one before you got to get going here in a few minutes, because I think this is the most interesting game possibly out of the week in the Big Ten, unless I'm forgetting about another one, which I might be. But Penn State traveling to Camp Randall, Penn State coming into this one undefeated, looking like a pretty good team in my opinion. And I want to get your thoughts on Penn State at large because they play your Buckeyes in a couple weeks here. Could be a bit of a tricky game, especially Penn State coming off that big win against USC a couple weeks ago. This will be the 7:30 p.m. NBC, Peacock, whatever streaming thing you watch it on game. What are your thoughts leading into this big nighttime matchup?
Yeah, I think Wisconsin has one of the best offensive lines in the Big Ten, and that this is going to be a really good matchup in the trenches with Penn State because you have Penn State with one of the best defensive lines in the country going against, like I said, this Wisconsin offensive line that has been very impressive this season. I mean, their pass blocking has been arguably the best in the country so far this year. You have Braden Locke back there who, he has some mobility, but I wouldn't call him a mobile quarterback, and he's able to, not be sacked nearly as much as some other players are. And as much as he does have his deficiencies at times, he looks a whole lot better because he's not being pressured as much. And so for me, Wisconsin needs to really solidify that this game and show that they are one of, if not the best offensive lines in the country with their pass blocking against Penn State in this one. And then on top of that, like Wisconsin's defense has been lights out. Mike Tressel, I love what he's been doing with this defense the last 3 games. And I know people will say like, oh, it was Northwestern. Well, guess what? Northwestern just put up 37 on the road against Maryland the week before last. So like, this is not a bad Northwestern offense. Jack Lausch, he's a playmaker.
AJ Henning, Michigan has good wide receivers out there. They're just on other teams now.
Exactly. AJ Henny, Bryce Kurtz, like these are playmakers on the outside as well. And Wisconsin, they shut them down. This is looking like the Wisconsin secondary that I thought they would be at the beginning of the season. It didn't look like it there for the first few games. I wouldn't say they were playing bad, but you just weren't seeing kind of the dominance out of the secondary that I thought you would see. But you have seen it these past 3 weeks between Rutgers, Purdue, Northwestern, which I get. People are going to say, oh, well, they haven't played anybody. Well, it's still the Big Ten, and this was still when Hudson Card was a quarterback for Purdue, who I don't think Hudson Card is a bad quarterback. I think, unfortunately, right now he has some bad pieces around him, which limits him. But at the end of the day, I do give Wisconsin their credit for shutting down those 3 teams. And if they can continue to do so against Penn State in this one, then we might be talking about a Wisconsin defense that's arguably one of the best in the Big Ten this season with what they've been able to do the past few weeks. And, I had another thought on this, and and the other part of it is like Andy Kotelnicki with Penn State as well. I don't think Penn State has the best playmakers in the conference, but you have arguably, I would say he's the most creative offensive coordinator, which is saying something because you have Chip Kelly in this Big Ten as well, and he's a very creative guy. But Andy Kotelnicki, with what he's been able to do with Tyler Warren and how he's utilized some other playmakers on this offense, it's been really impressive. So I'm really looking forward to this one, and I'm really looking forward to it, not just because of the matchups like that, but the fact that it's at Camp Randall. That is a huge benefit for Wisconsin.
Camp Randall at
night makes it an even more interesting game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be a really good test for Penn State. And Wisconsin, if only they could have kept it all together in that USC game a few weeks ago when they had that. Was it a big first half they had where it looked like they were going to pull it off?
Yeah, they had like 3 turnovers in the first half.
Yeah, 3 like kind of weird turnovers.
Yeah,
and Braden Locke played good to start off that one too as well, though that D'Anton Lynn defense doesn't look like it's nearly that close to being there yet either. What is Wisconsin's record again? I'm missing
5-2.
I have it in my notes here. 5-2. This could be a 6-1 team. And yeah, I thought when they lost their starting quarterback earlier this season, I thought that was it for them. And Braden Locke has stepped in and played great. Like you said, that defense is playing really well. I will be curious to see, because I know they like to play a lot of they like to stay in a lot of 3-4 and stuff, don't they? And like play with 3 down linemen with like linebackers at edge and stuff like that. I really want to see what Andy Kotelnicki does against a defense that plays with that kind of scheme and likes to stick in it a lot, because I don't think Penn State has seen a defensive scheme like that. They see a lot of teams typical of modern football that stay in a lot of nickel looks, speaking of D'Anton Lynn and USC and stuff like that. So it'll be really interesting to see what Penn State tries to do in this game. Tyler Warren is just a mismatch for anybody right now. Like, you put a safety on him deep and he'll beat you. He runs out wide and you put a corner on him and he's bodying guys out. You run him in the Wildcat. A couple weeks ago, he snapped the ball and then on the same play caught a touchdown pass. Like, the things they're doing with Tyler Warren are wild right now too. Probably one of the most fun offenses to watch in all of college football for me, because I like a lot of that old like option stuff too and seeing the Wildcat and things. But it'll be really interesting. I do think Wisconsin has in a way, especially with their linebackers. I detailed their linebackers in the offseason. They've got some fast, athletic linebackers that can run sideline to sideline. And if Penn State's doing a lot of that option stuff or trying to stretch things outside, I could see Wisconsin, again, tackling. Tackling will be a big thing. I could see Wisconsin maybe keeping this one close, but I could also see Penn State. You never know when Andy Koldenicki gets in his bag and is calling, plays, at his best. This team is really good, really good.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think Tyler Warren is the piece that I am the most concerned for Wisconsin going up in this one. I know I just preached about how great this defense has been, and they have been great, but they haven't seen a tight end like Tyler Warren yet, if you ask me. The Purdue tight end, which I'm blanking on his name right now, he's Claire, I think it is. He's a good tight end, but he's no Tyler Warren, and I haven't seen exceptional coverage out of their linebackers this season. Allegro is their highest rated coverage linebacker on PFF. Yeah. So, he might be able to do that. But at the end of the day, Tyler Warren, I mean, for any team he faces, it's gonna be a huge daunting task for them to do. So I think Wisconsin, like I said, their defenses look much better. So if there's any defense that can get it done against Penn State, I think that they are one of the ones that can do it. I'm just really going to be looking at who is covering Tyler Warren in this one and what is happening with those matchups, because it could I won't say it's going to be another 200-yard game for Tyler Warren, because nobody should be.
No 17 receptions for like 250 yards.
Yeah, it's not going to be that, but I could see Tyler Warren, being somebody they go to on third down here and there and keep the chains moving. So it's going to be huge for them to keep the ball out of Tyler Warren's hands on third down. And if they're able to do it, they got a really good shot in winning this one.
And yeah, I think that's true. But I also go back to, and maybe you as an Ohio State fan can provide some insight on this too. Julian Fleming has stepped up a little bit here in the last couple of weeks. They've had some wide receivers step up. Amari Evans was a guy that I remember a few weeks ago had a big game. It seems like every couple of games there's another wide receiver that Koldenicki's like, you're the guy this game. We're going to feature you. Like we found a way to, we like this receiver in this matchup or against this specific defense, and it's just, and the thing we haven't talked about either so far is Aller playing really well so far this season too. He's up in the top 5 in both completion percentage and pass efficiency in the country. And that's the completion percentage did not drop off at all from last season. And the yards per attempt went way up. I think he's up around 11 or 12 yards per attempt now. Last season, that was at like 6 or 8. It was pretty low because everything was dink and dunk. So it'll be really interesting. Wisconsin, I will say this for sure, that defense will be tested sideline to sideline and deep. Like Koldenicki's going to attack the entire field. So Wisconsin definitely needs to step it up. Defensively for Penn State, I think it's more simple. It's just get to Braden Locke, find a way to do that, find a way to rattle him. I don't think Wisconsin has any wide receivers that are really, they got a lot of slot guys, it seems like, and they don't really have any guys that'll test that defensive secondary too much. Just really curious.
Anthony could get loose and get a big play here or there and really help this team. He was able to do that the past 3 or 4 weeks. I'm forgetting exactly which opponents he was able to do that against, but he's been a name that I've heard once or twice and has been able to help this Wisconsin team. So if he's able to get loose and do some things, that'll be a huge boost for Wisconsin. And honestly, who doesn't like saying the name Vinny Anthony? That's an awesome
name. Right. That sounds like an East Coast, like, if he wasn't playing football, he'd be working in his dad's sub shop kind of name. I love it. Yeah. Well, that's really
one more thing I'll say. I still see a lot of people doubting Drew Aller. Stop doubting Drew Aller. His ADOT, his average depth of target so far this season is 9.8. He is not just throwing dink and dunk passes. Hey. Drew Aller has been so much better this season, and he's been throwing the ball further, and it's really been a highlight for this offense to see him be able to do that. And it goes to show when you have Andy Koldenicki, somebody who is obviously believing in Drew Aller and giving him confidence for him to be able to do what he's doing. So I just wanted to say that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm glad you said it. I was one of the biggest Aller haters last year because I saw the way in which they were underutilizing him now, looking back on it. And I thought this kid was a 5-star coming out of high school. I had initially thought, you know how recruiting in high school really works is like if you blow up and get, you know, you grow 3 inches over the course of a summer and you get a big cannon for an arm, all the scouts are going to love you. And I thought that might have been the case with Aller, but like now you see the actual skill. And I'm glad you brought it up. He's playing lights out so far this season and is a big reason why Penn State has improved. I also did want to highlight this comment by Sean. Will Pauling is probably my favorite wide receiver Wisconsin has. I love his ability to work over the middle of the field and stuff. He's kind of a beast. Got that little bit of Steve Smith mentality I see out there. Very like obviously not on the same level, but Amon-Ra St. Brown kind of mentality there where he's just a dog. So Wisconsin does have some weapons. It's eerily similar to me though to the Illinois-Oregon game we just talked about. Do they have enough weapons to really test that Penn State defense? Because like Oregon, they got defensive playmakers at all 3 levels. They got AJ Harris came back and came over from I think it was Georgia, has been playing really well. Colby King at linebacker is a great linebacker, and obviously they got Abdul Carter and Donnie Dennis Sutton, who are probably the best edge pairing. If not one of the best edge pairings in the conference. So it'll be tough for Wisconsin to score a lot of points on Penn State, but I think it'll be a really interesting game nonetheless. Penn State, by the way, favored by 6.5 in that one on ESPN right now.
I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a really good game and a great one to end the night with at 7:30.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably get better commentary in that one than Gary Danielson for sure.
I like the NBC crew. They've done a good job, I think.
They got that Josh. What's his name? Josh. He does the show with Jake Butt. I really like him, the Ohio State guy. He does a great job.
I will say I don't like their halftime crew. I've never been a Chris Sims fan. And Nicole Auerbach, she's fine, but
she's all right. Yeah.
Yeah. I've never been not a fan of Nicole Auerbach, but you know, it's Chris Sims for me. I can't stand him.
Yeah, Chris Sims. Yeah, a lot of the there's a lot of commentators out there that just have like the same cliches, like the same 5 cliches they throw out there on any given comment. It's like, oh.
Well, the thing that got me was, and I got to run here in just a second.
Yeah,
but
no worries.
last thing, the thing that got me was they went to the NBC crew. I think it was the halftime of the. It wasn't the Ohio State game. It was a different late night game they had on NBC, and they asked for their Heisman like picks or whatever, and. It was just after Alabama had lost to Vanderbilt, and they go to Chris Sims, and Chris Sims like, I think it's Jalen Milroe. He's my husband. No. I was like, dude, he just played go with Diego Pavia. Like, you can't be saying Jalen Milroe that last game. It's like you didn't even watch the game.
Do you not know how that trophy works? Yeah. Like you win that trophy on big moments. By the way, the correct answer is Ashton Jeanty.
Yeah,
that's the right answer.
Really who it is.
Will he be the one to win the Heisman? No. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But he is the right answer. Like in any given year, there's a player out there that deserves to be there and probably deserves to win it and won't. Like, I'll even say it as a Michigan fan. 2021 Kenneth Walker should have been at the ceremony and was robbed. Like
2022 Blake Corum, if he didn't get that injury.
Oh, if he did, even with the injury, I think he still should have been at the ceremony.
Oh yeah, he
was the best running back in college football leading into that. And then oh, sorry, we kind of forgot about, and it wasn't like he got injured in the 3rd game of the season. It was like the 10th game of the season he went down. It's like he had played 10 games leading into that.
Yeah,
he had like 10 games of evidence to show. Just nuts. Yeah. Well, 3/4 of the people that have Heisman votes don't even watch the sport, so
that's true.
Not. But I know you got to get running. I really appreciate you coming on. We'll have to have you on in the future if you do have time, maybe another night where the wife is doing schoolwork and all that stuff, and you got a little time. We'd love to have you back. Do you want to go ahead and plug your pluggables real quick while you got to get going for all the people out there?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Just the Big Ten Huddle. Go check me out over there. You can find me and my co-host Zach, and we're also going to be doing the call-in show for Ohio State. So when you get done here with, stay for the rest of the show here. Don't be coming on over to Ohio State. But when you get done here, if you want to call on over to Ohio State, got the Nebraska game coming up. We got some injury news we're going to talk about, and we'll call in, have callers, and talk about that. So I appreciate it, Darren.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
You too.
See you.
All right. Well, that was that from JR. Really appreciate having him on. Appreciate you guys in the chat. We're going to wrap it up here rather quickly in a little bit. We can talk a little bit Michigan State, Michigan, if anyone's interested. Well, I'm going to leave it up to the commenters. We got Michigan State, Michigan we can talk about. We can talk more Indiana football. We've really covered everything I had in my outline over here so far with JR. My notes are pretty much empty here. But if you guys want to bring anything up in the chat, don't forget to drop those super chats. They're always greatly appreciated. And again, I'm 4 weeks into this thing. If you drop some super chats, if you like what we do over here with the new Big Ten Live, that just goes to show Mark, hey, maybe I should keep this Darren Graham guy on. He seems pretty cool. Seems decent enough. Anyway, that was a lot. That was a lot to ramble about in a short amount of time. But we really do like having JR on. Just looking through the comments here. Yeah, Daniel, it was Joshua Perry. Thank you. And Joshua Perry and Jake Butt do a really good job on their podcast. But just to plug a couple of friends of mine, you should be watching the Scarlet and Blue show with Garrison and Bryce. They do a really good job over there. If you haven't checked them out on YouTube, they're going to be on the Big Ten Live the week of the Ohio State Michigan game, by the way. So just to plug that for a second. Matthew Anderson, good show, good night. Thank you. It's not quite over yet. If you guys want to drop any chats recommending what we should talk about, if you have any questions, we'll hang out for a few more minutes. Like I said, my outline is pretty much done, but we could talk a little Michigan State if you guys want. Preview that game. Preview Nebraska at Ohio State, although I feel like that game will pretty much go the same way that than it did for Nebraska last week. Dave Valensky, nice to see you here. Minnesota versus Maryland. Well, I got to look up the Big Ten standings real quick because it has been a wild year in the conference so far, and it is just nuts. Because we have 4 teams, I think, that are clearly ahead of everyone else. Ohio State is actually lower in the standings than Wisconsin and Illinois right now, purely because Wisconsin and Illinois have played more games. But you were wondering about Minnesota, Maryland. Yeah, Minnesota 2-2 in the conference, had that big win against USC. Of course, came so close against Michigan a few weeks ago. Against Maryland. Maryland, by the way, just got housed. Absolutely housed, as JR had said, by Northwestern. Was it last week or the week before? Minnesota, I think, is a team that might be a little bit better than their record. Dave, thank you. $4.99 super chat. Really appreciate that. Yeah, here's some money talking about Minnesota versus Maryland. Well, we're definitely going to do that now. You caught me a little off guard because I didn't actually have that one in my pre-show notes, but that is definitely an intriguing matchup. Billy Edwards for Maryland, of course, has kind of turned out to be a much better quarterback than I thought he would be. Honestly, when I heard that Talia was not going to get the extra year of eligibility that he was looking for, I assumed that Maryland would look in the transfer portal or what have you for a quarterback, but they stuck with Billy Edwards. He's been good so far this season, and Maryland has been in some games. Now, again, they did get housed by Northwestern a week or two ago, and I need to actually Google their schedule and not just the state of Maryland. Interestingly enough, I just got a picture of a crab on Google. Because I got to refresh my memory on what all Maryland has really done so far this season. Oh, gosh, how did I forget? Maryland, and we should have talked about it earlier in this live stream, they upset USC this past weekend. Where did I have it here? Not that one. That one. They beat USC 29-28. Was it a last-second touchdown or field goal? Just absolutely not. But how much credit can you really give a team for beating USC these days? They're losing to everybody, Nebraska style, late in game, close games, touchdowns, field goals. Though I think a team like Maryland should still get some credit. That was an insane comeback, considering if you would have asked me the Friday night of the week before, after losing 37-10 to Northwestern in the fashion that they did, if they had any chance, they let AJ Henning from Northwestern get loose on them. And the prospect of facing Miller Moss and all of those, Jacoby Lane and all of those wide receivers that USC has, I would have told you it was game over before it even started. But here comes Maryland. And Sean with another comment. Appreciate you, Sean. Maryland is the most volatile team in the Big Ten. You never know what to expect. Honestly, there's a lot of teams in the Big Ten like that this season. We talked about Indiana earlier in the stream. And to Maryland's credit, they ended up ultimately losing to Indiana 42-28. But I think if you go back and look at the box score of that game was close into the third quarter. But then, yeah, you look at they lost to Virginia, who's not too terribly, or no, they did beat Virginia. I was looking at that wrong. They beat Villanova. They lost to Michigan State, which now that doesn't look like that bad of a loss. So interestingly enough, 4-3 Big Ten team? Maryland, just to talk about them for a minute, at Minnesota this week. They get a week off before facing Oregon, the new number 1 team in the country, at Oregon. They face Rutgers, that East Coast rivalry the Big Ten was trying to make for a while now. Then they have to finish up against Iowa and Penn State, though, and they travel to Penn State. So in those last 4 games there, I would be really surprised if they won more than 2 of them. Actually, I would be shocked. I would be very, very shocked, because that would mean they'd either beat the number 1 or the current number 3 team in the country. And both of those they go on the road to. But you see, they already have 4 wins. They could beat Minnesota this week. That gets them to 5. You beat Rutgers, that gets you to 6. So you're looking at bowling, which honestly for Maryland this season isn't too terribly bad. Touchdown with a minute left. Yeah, that's how I thought it went. USC just crap in the bed left and right so far this season. Just absolutely nuts. Miller Moss, I thought he was going to be a great quarterback in college football leading into this one. And boy, howdy, was I wrong about that. Just a terrible play down the line in a lot of these games by Miller Moss, too. Sam from College Football Sam was on last week with us and talked about how he's mentioned how he thinks he's the next or worse than Spencer Rattler. I don't know if I'd go that far, but man, oh man. This matchup with Minnesota will be interesting, though. Minnesota still plays decently great defense. Coy Parrish is a name that you should really get familiar with for that team. Minnesota's pass defense has actually been insanely good so far this season. Let me pull up the stats right. Where is it? Of course, it doesn't pop up when I am actually looking for it. Well, in terms of pure passing yards allowed, which I know isn't everything, they're only giving up 145 passing yards per game. 139.6. I was looking at that wrong. They're giving up 5.25 yards per attempt and 8.8 yards per completion. They've had quite a few interceptions this season so far, thanks to guys like Coy Parrish, the freshman, I think, phenom for Minnesota. 4th in the entire country in overall pass defense. Let's get to one of my new favorite metrics, team pass efficiency defense. And of course, boom, they're right there as well. They are 5th in the country in team pass efficiency defense. The quarterback rating of their opponents combined is 95.14. Now, the interesting thing is we have to kind of qualify this because they played Michigan, and Michigan is just god awful at quarterback this season. And something like 3 of the top 5 teams in team pass efficiency defense are teams that played Michigan. So it's like playing a academy, a service academy. You get a big boost in your defensive, your pass defense stats. But regardless, able to slow down Miller Moss enough so that they were able to win that game. So yeah, they have the great defensive end too, whose name I'm blanking on right now. Some pretty good linebackers. I think Minnesota will win that game. Overall, the quality of team, the quality of roster for Minnesota is a little bit better. I do a thing over on my channel called the Darren's Power Index every season. It's a analytic rating where we combine a few different key statistics and priors over the past few years. It's kind of like a poor man's SP plus, but really what it gives you is like the health and status of the program headed into the season. Minnesota's got some talent. We do a thing that we call team talent index within that. That's kind of like a blue chip ratio of sorts, just a different way of measuring blue chip ratio. They actually have a surprisingly amount of players on roster for a program like Minnesota that are former blue chippers. I think it's around 13 to 15%. And of course, PJ Fleck is a pretty decent head coach. So is Minnesota at home in that one, or are they the away team? They're at home. 3:30. It's the 3:30 p.m. FS1 game. I keep forgetting every week that we have a random 3:30 or 4 o'clock FS1 game in the Big Ten every week now. So I think, yeah, Dave, you bring up a good point. There are at least 3 to 4 NFL players in Minnesota's defensive backfield. It's a good defensive backfield that does not get talked about enough. And just for a second, let's look at Minnesota's schedule here. I have to apologize too, guys. I am relatively new at this with StreamYard. It is not the streaming software that I use when I stream over at Darren Talks Ball, so I don't really know how to screen share on this thing yet. But I can tell you right now, after playing Maryland, Minnesota has to travel to Illinois. Two really good defenses in that matchup. That might be a classic, like 14-7 Big Ten game. At Rutgers, they play Penn State, probably be a loss. They play at Wisconsin to finish off the season in their rivalry game there. So far, like Maryland, 4-3. This is really kind of a potential turning point for either program. Now, I think Minnesota has that game, though, in hand. I don't know what the line is on that one. Minnesota -4.5. That's kind of how I would lean to. The Big Ten, outside of those big 4 teams we mentioned earlier in the stream, those being Indiana, Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State. Rank them however you want. I think Indiana is definitely on the up and up. I'm hoping to get somebody who's more of an Indiana expert on next week, by the way, for our guests. So look for that. Get subscribed to the Big Ten at the Voice of College Football and all that good stuff. Outside of those 4 teams, the Big Ten is just as volatile as all get out. I mean, any given week. So what I've honestly been looking at, both here and on my other channel, is honestly who the home team is. When things are that close between all the other teams in the Big Ten, it comes down to things like who is the road team, who has to make a 3 time zone move in any given week. Those little things add up and count. There are, let's see, if you count Ohio State, which is a technicality, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams. Actually, if you want to do it this way, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 teams, nearly half the conference, that are either 5-2 or 4-3 overall right now. That's how close the Big Ten is outside of the big 4 that we just mentioned a minute ago. And maybe you want to put a qualifier on Indiana. Maybe you want to say that they haven't necessarily played anybody yet because Nebraska is one of those. They are the 5-2 team in that example. But yeah, it's just it's 3, I think, really good teams in Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State. 1 up and coming in Indiana. And then a whole lot of, even UCLA got their first conference victory this past weekend. And even Northwestern was able to put nearly 40 points on a Maryland team that a lot of people thought could be potentially good this year. Washington, Michigan have completely nosedived and fallen off a cliff after what they were able to do last season. So the Big Ten is really, really close. Dave, you should talk to Jeffrey about Indiana. He has the Indiana show. I should talk to Jeffrey about Indiana. That may or may not be what I was hinting at with who I may try to get on as a guess. But yeah, I would take Maryland just because I'm more of a guy, or excuse me, Minnesota in the Minnesota-Maryland matchup, just because I'm a guy who leans more towards like total roster depth. I think Minnesota has more depth at a lot of positions over Maryland. Max Brosmer is a really good quarterback. They have a really good wide receiver. They have Darius Taylor, who Michigan should have recruited. I don't know why you didn't, but hey, it happens, I guess. Minnesota's a good team for what their record is. Again, I got to go back and look at their schedule to see who all they've lost to. So they lost to North Carolina in a game that they should have won, really, because they missed a field goal at the end of it. They lost to Iowa and they lost to Michigan. And really, they should have won the game against Michigan, too. I know woulda, shoulda, coulda, as we say on Darren Talks Ball, only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades and definitely not in college football. But their 3 losses are North Carolina, Iowa, and Michigan. Like, those are all, still quality opponents ish, if you want to count Michigan in that one. But yeah. Anyway, unless we get some more super chats rolling in, we'll probably cut out of here. If you have a super chat or something you want to drop in the chat, ask me anything about the Big Ten. We're going to kind of wrap this up in a few minutes otherwise, but hit us in the chat with any questions. Really good stream tonight, by the way. I really appreciate everyone watching and dropping those super chats and commenting and liking the video. Again, subscribe to the Big Ten channel here at the Voice of College Football. We have to beat those SEC guys. We do. That is my goal in life right now, which may not seem like a lot. It may seem like I have a kind of a depressing life outside of this. I promise you I don't. I'm just a nerd about college football. I absolutely love the sport. And I love talking the sport with you guys. So again, feel free, drop anything in the chat. And if you don't anytime soon, if no one really has anything else they want to say or talk about, we'll probably get out of here in just a minute. I'm going to give you guys until I am done taking this drink of water. Really long drink of water. All right, if no one else has anything else really you want to talk about, I'm going to finish this one up. Really appreciate all you guys. We were going to try and get a guest on for next week. Don't really have anyone lined up yet, but yes, we are going to try and get an Indiana expert on, talk a bit about their season so far. Really appreciate you guys. Like this video, share it around, share all the content here on the Voice of College Football around, and subscribe, of course, to the Big Ten channel at the Voice of College Football, which I will be back on next Monday. Also, check out my channel, Darren Talks Ball, if you haven't already. And as always, be kind to other people out there.